At 88 years old, Jack Nicholson has seen it all. The fame, the chaos, the glory, and the heartbreak of Hollywood. For decades, he's been the face of rebellion and charm, an actor who could turn a villain into a hero and a simple line into a legend. But behind the sunglasses and the sly grin, Nicholson has always been brutally honest about one thing: the people in Hollywood he couldn't stand. Now, as the legendary actor lives a quieter life away from the spotlight, insiders close to him reveal that he's finally named the 6 actors he truly hated the most, and the reasons behind his disdain are shocking. These weren't petty rivalries or minor disagreements. These were clashes born from betrayal, jealousy, and the raw intensity of the film industry's golden years. Throughout his storied career, Nicholson earned a reputation for being fearless on and off the screen. He respected authenticity and despised arrogance, phoniness, or anyone who tried to outshine him for the wrong reasons. Jack doesn't hate easily, one longtime friend shared, but once someone crosses him, he never forgets. Some of the names on his list are Hollywood royalty, men he once worked with, admired, and even shared the screen with. Others are people who underestimated his talent, mocked his choices, or tried to manipulate their way through fame. Now, as these revelations surface, the world is finally learning what really went on behind those classic movie sets and why certain names still make Jack Nicholson's blood boil after all these years. Jack Nicholson's rise through Hollywood wasn't a smooth climb. It was a war zone filled with egos, ambition, and ruthless competition. From the late 1960s through the 1990s, Nicholson reigned as one of the most unpredictable forces in film. He wasn't just acting, he was living his characters. Whether it was the rebellious McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or the unhinged Jack Torrance in The Shining, his performances weren't just memorable, they were terrifyingly real. But that same intensity that made him a legend also made him difficult to work with. Nicholson had an unspoken rule: he respected anyone who respected the craft. But if someone came on set with arrogance, ego, or manipulation, Jack's tolerance evaporated instantly. He had no patience for phonies, one crew member recalled. You couldn't fake it around. Him! He'd see right through you. The first name on Nicholson's private hate list reportedly dates back to his early Dorsham years, a rival actor who constantly undermined him during the making of Easy Rider. Sources claim that Nicholson never forgave the man for trying to steal credit for scenes that launched Jack's career. That betrayal, early in his success, taught Nicholson an important lesson. In Hollywood, friendship was often an illusion. Another bitter rivalry emerged in the 1970s when Jack clashed with a co-star known for being controlling on set. Their arguments became legendary, shouting matches that forced the director to pause filming. Nicholson believed the man's arrogance came from insecurity, and once filming wrapped, the two never spoke again. Years later, when asked about him in an interview, Jack smirked and said only, he was an actor pretending to be an actor. But not all of Nicholson's grudges came from professional rivalry. Some were deeply personal. In the 1980s, during the peak of his fame, he had a falling out with another Hollywood icon over a woman they both loved. The tabloids turned it into a spectacle, but those close to Nicholson said it wasn't jealousy, it was betrayal. Jack could handle competition, said one longtime friend. But betrayal and that cut deep. Even directors weren't immune to Nicholson's wrath. Though he respected visionaries like Stanley Kubrick and Roman Polanski, he had no tolerance for those who disrespected the art of storytelling. If a director treated actors like props or tried to stifle creativity, Nicholson would call them out, loudly. One crew member recalled him saying, "If you don't trust your actors, you don't belong behind a camera." By the 1990s, Nicholson's reputation as a Hollywood bad boy had softened slightly, but his opinions hadn't. He became more selective with his roles and even more outspoken about the people he admired and those he didn't. He once remarked, "You can fake charm, but you can't fake talent." That simple statement summed up his worldview. The 6 names that Nicholson reportedly hated weren't just people who annoyed him. They represented the very traits he despised: arrogance, dishonesty, greed, and betrayal. To Jack, the film industry was sacred. It was about truth, emotion, and the human condition. Anyone who treated it as a game or a power trip didn't deserve his respect. Even now, as Nicholson lives out his twilight years in seclusion, the echoes of those rivalries linger. Friends say he doesn't dwell on the past, but when certain names come up, his expression changes. It's not bitterness, one insider explained. It's memory. Jack remembers everything, every word, every look, every lie. For Nicholson, those 6 names aren't just grudges. They're reminders of what Hollywood really is, a world of bright lights and dark hearts. And perhaps that's what made him so great, the understanding that beneath the glamour, truth always finds a way to reveal itself. As the years went by, Jack Nicholson's reputation as one of Hollywood's greatest actors grew beyond measure, but so did the stories about his fiery temper and unpredictable nature. Nicholson wasn't just another Hollywood star. He was a force of nature, a man who demanded authenticity from everyone around him. For decades, he ruled the screen with charisma and intensity. But behind that confident grin lay years of frustration with actors he couldn't stand, the ones he believed lacked the passion and discipline that acting deserved. One of those names, insiders claim, was Val Kilmer. During the filming of The Doors and Batman Forever, Nicholson reportedly felt that Kilmer was trying too hard to emulate his own intensity rather than create something original. A source once said, Jack didn't like people who acted like they were method geniuses but didn't back it up with heart. To Nicholson, acting was a sacred craft, not a competition of egos, and Kilmer's reputation for being difficult rubbed him the wrong way. Another surprising name on Jack's list was Marlon Brando. Yes, the very legend many thought Jack admired. But while Nicholson respected Brando's early work, he quietly despised how Brando's later years were defined by carelessness and apathy. The two shared mutual respect, but behind the scenes, Nicholson often said Brando had given up on his art. To Jack, that was unforgivable. He once told a close friend, "You don't get to quit on your gift." But perhaps the most personal grudge came from his long-standing rivalry with Tom Cruise. The two worked together on A Few Good Men, delivering one of the most iconic courtroom showdowns in movie history. While their on-screen chemistry was undeniable, Nicholson reportedly couldn't stand Cruise's relentless perfectionism and polished public image. Jack, who thrived on chaos and realism, found Cruise's Hollywood clean attitude artificial. Yet deep down, Nicholson also envied Cruise's unwavering control over his own career, something Jack never quite managed. Then there was Jim Carrey, an actor whose wild comedic energy was both admired and despised in Hollywood circles. Nicholson saw Carrey as someone who relied too heavily on gimmicks rather than substance. While others found Jim's antics hilarious, Jack reportedly once said, "He's talented, sure, but where's the pain? Where's the truth?" It was that lack of emotional depth that kept Jack from ever truly respecting him. Interestingly, Nicholson's list didn't just include the arrogant or the overconfident. It also featured actors he felt betrayed the spirit of storytelling itself. One of those was Adam Sandler. Despite Sandler's undeniable box office success, Jack felt his comedic style lowered the bar for Hollywood standards. He even turned down a role alongside Sandler in Anger Management 2, allegedly saying, "Once was enough." Their first collaboration, though successful, left Nicholson exhausted from what he called endless improvisation without purpose. Finally, there was Robert De Niro, a name that shocked everyone who knew Jack personally. The two were often compared throughout their careers, and while Nicholson admired De Niro's dedication to the craft, he reportedly resented what he saw as an overly serious, joyless approach to acting. Jack, who believed art should always have a pulse of fun and madness, thought De Niro took himself too seriously. Over time, the mutual respect faded, replaced by quiet distance and competition. These 6 names, Kilmer, Brando, Cruise, Carrey, Sandler, and De Niro, each represented something Nicholson couldn't tolerate in Hollywood: pretension, laziness, arrogance, superficiality, silliness, and self-importance. But more than that, they reflected the contradictions within Jack himself. He was a man who loved chaos, yet demanded control, who despised ego, but had one larger than life. Even as he entered his late 80s, Jack never apologized for his opinions. To him, honesty was the last refuge of authenticity in a world full of masks. And maybe that's why, even when he admitted which actors he hated, Fans still loved him for it, because he said what everyone else in Hollywood was too afraid to say. As Jack Nicholson grew older, the bright lights of Hollywood that once defined his life began to fade. The man who had dominated the screen with swagger and wit slowly disappeared from public view. His last film, How Do You Know, in 2010, marked the end of an era. Fans wondered what had happened to the once great showman who could command a room with just a smirk. But the truth was, Jack had grown tired, not just of acting, but of the people who ran the industry he once loved. Those who knew him well said that Nicholson's bitterness wasn't born out of hatred alone. It came from heartbreak. He watched as the art of acting turned into a business of branding. Roles were no longer about depth or storytelling, but about algorithms, market trends, and image management. The same Hollywood that had made him a legend was now a place he no longer recognized. It's said that Jack spent hours reminiscing about the past, often talking about the golden age when actors were raw, unpredictable, and human. He once told a friend, "Everyone wants to look perfect now. Nobody wants to be ugly or angry or real anymore." His frustration toward the new generation of actors wasn't personal. It was philosophical. They represented the end of everything he believed in. In his private life, Nicholson had grown increasingly isolated. He rarely attended events or spoke to the media. Old friends like Warren Beatty and Al Pacino tried to reach out, but Jack had built invisible walls around himself. His mansion in the Hollywood Hills, once the site of wild parties filled with laughter, now stood silent. Those who visited said the home felt like a museum of memories, movie posters, Oscars, and photographs frozen in time. But even in his solitude, Jack's sharp tongue never dulled. In one of his last public appearances, he joked that he'd outlived most of the people who ever annoyed him. Yet there was an undeniable sadness behind the laughter. He missed the chaos, the late-night arguments on set, and even the rivalries that once fueled him. "I thrived on tension," he admitted once. "It made me better. But now there's no one left to fight." Insiders say that Nicholson's reflections on the actors he hated mellowed with time. He no longer spoke with anger, but with disappointment. He reportedly softened his stance on Robert De Niro, acknowledging his discipline and endurance. About Tom Cruise, he said, "The kid never stopped working. I respect that." Even Marlon Brando, whom he had once criticized, became a figure of empathy in Jack's old age. "He was tired," Nicholson said quietly. "Just like I am now." Still, Jack never fully forgave Hollywood for what it became. He watched with dismay as remakes and sequels replaced originality, and as social media fame began to outweigh raw talent. "It's not show business anymore," he reportedly told a close friend. "It's just business." That statement, simple yet heavy with truth, summed up the man he had become, a relic of a bygone era who refused to compromise his principles, even in the face of irrelevance. Friends say that despite his bitterness, Nicholson found peace in his solitude. He often spent his mornings watching old films, not his own, but those of actors he admired: Humphrey Bogart, James Cagney, and Montgomery Clift. They reminded him of a time when acting was dangerous, when every scene felt alive. He once said, "Those guys didn't care about followers or fame. They cared about truth. That's what's missing now." Jack Nicholson's story isn't just about the actors he hated. It's about the ideals he refused to let go of. He represented a breed of performers who believed in the messy beauty of humanity, who understood that flaws were what made art timeless. And as he sat alone in his twilight years, surrounded by memories of a Hollywood that no longer existed, one truth remained clear. Jack Nicholson never changed for the world. The world simply changed without him. In the quiet corners of his Los Angeles mansion, surrounded by old movie memorabilia and fading photographs, Jack Nicholson's legacy sits larger than life. The man who once embodied rebellion and confidence now lives far from the spotlight, but his presence in Hollywood still looms like a shadow, one that refuses to fade. For many, Nicholson was more than an actor. He was a force of nature, and even as he grows older, stories about his wit, temper, and unfiltered honesty continue to ripple through the entertainment world. In recent interviews and conversations with friends, It's become clear that Jack's reflections aren't about grudges anymore. Time has softened the edges of his anger, but it hasn't dulled his truthfulness. He still speaks candidly about the industry that gave him everything, and took just as much away. When asked about the actors he couldn't stand, Nicholson reportedly laughed and said, "You can't hate people forever. You just outlive them." It was classic Jack, sharp, self-aware, and slightly tragic. Despite the fierce opinions he once held, Nicholson's later years have been filled with moments of humility. He's spoken about the importance of forgiveness, even for those who wronged him. One insider recalls Jack saying, "When you've got nothing left to prove, you stop fighting the ghosts." For a man who built a career out of confrontation, on screen and off, that realization was monumental. As the years passed, Jack began to reflect more deeply on his relationships, particularly with the very actors he once clashed with. He admitted admiration for George C. Scott's intensity, respect for Robert De Niro's discipline, and even a nostalgic fondness for Marlon Brando's unpredictability. "Brando was chaos," he once said, "but without chaos, there's no art." While he has made peace with the past, the same can't be said for Hollywood's present. Nicholson has openly criticized what he calls manufactured stardom. He detests the idea that fame now comes easier through social media than through genuine work. "You used to earn it," he reportedly told a journalist. "Now you can just buy it." Those who know him say that watching the industry change so drastically has been both fascinating and painful for him. Still, there are flashes of the old Jack, the rebellious spark that refuses to die. Friends claim that when he's in good spirits, he'll pour a drink, sit back, and tell stories that could fill entire books. Tales from the set of The Shining, where he terrified crew members just by staying in character, or stories of wild nights with Warren Beatty and Dennis Hopper that blur the line between myth and memory. "He's a storyteller," one friend said. "Even when the story's about hate, it ends up being about love." In truth, Nicholson's so-called hatred of certain actors was never just about dislike, it was about standards. He demanded passion, effort, and honesty in every performance. Anyone who fell short of that, in his eyes, didn't belong. But now, at 88, those old grudges have transformed into lessons. "You can't stay mad forever," he said once. "At some point, you've got to laugh at it all." Jack Nicholson's name may not appear in new movie credits anymore, but his influence remains immortal. Every time a young actor studies One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or Chinatown, they're not just watching a performance, they're witnessing a philosophy. A belief that art should be dangerous, imperfect, and unapologetically human. In the end, the 6 actors he once hated became symbols of his complex journey through fame and ego. They reminded him, and the world, that greatness often comes with friction. As the lights of Hollywood continue to change, Jack Nicholson remains one of the last true icons who lived, fought, and loved every moment of it without ever pretending to be someone he wasn't. And maybe that's why, even after all these years, Hollywood still whispers his name with both fear and reverence, because in a world built on illusion, Jack Nicholson was always the real thing.